Welcome to the First Time Facilitator podcast. Whether you're a first-time facilitator or a seasoned pro, listen in for tips and tricks to make a bigger impact at the next workshop you deliver. And now, your host, Leanne Hughes.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Leanne Hughes, and I'm here to help you create unpredictable workshop experiences that predictably work. Now, last week on the show was a best of on the First Time Facilitator podcast. I was chatting to Dana, the trainer, who is now known as Diversity Dana. She was telling us all about the way that she creates energy, fun, laughter, all that cool stuff in her workshops. This week, it's a solo episode. I'm riffing on a question that was posed in the Flipchart Facebook group. Next week, back with a fresh interview for you. So very excited to share that. So fun fact is that I actually record these solo episodes very close to the release time. And I did that to pay attention to what's happening in the current environment. And hopefully it's still relevant for you in future. I think this episode will no doubt still be relevant. I don't think any productivity expert would say that's a good thing, but I love just paying attention to what's happening in our environment and then responding to it. So today's question was prompted from Adele Spurgin. G'day, Adele. Thank you so much for throwing this question to the Flipchart group. And there were tons of incredible answers from our fellow Flipcharters. But her question really got me thinking. And so I thought I'd share some of my reflections when I read the question on this episode, as it may be helpful for you. Adele's question was this: I'd love to hear your tips, please, Flippers. Traditionally, I am right at home facilitating. So today, when a keynote speaking gig in front of 750 people was offered to me, I just said yes, and I'm now starting to work out the how. Any advice, insights, etc. would be greatly appreciated, as I haven't done this size crowd in a while. Leanne, I saw your LinkedIn post, and although this is not an MC role, maybe you could help shed some insights, please. I mean, how hard can it be, right? Thanks in advance, Adele. Okay, so this is an in-person event that Adele is running. But before I answer that, just a quick couple of announcements. First of all, some of the resources that I mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes over at firsttimefacilitator.com/episode 167. And if you'd like to continue the conversation when the podcast is over, you can join our community of over 1,300 facilitators from all over the world in the group that I keep talking about on this podcast, the Flipchart Facebook group. All right, let's jump right in. First of all, congrats, Adele, on scoring this gig. Talking in front of 750 people. When you've been running workshops virtually is a really big deal. And I think it's about finding that muscle memory that we had in the past. I remember jumping into my first face-to-face workshop following virtual work, and it felt really different. The energy was different. The fact that I even had to pack a bag the night before to take in and look at parking. And I remember getting to the venue an hour early and the doors weren't even open. And it just reminded me, oh yeah, this is the stuff that we've got to deal with when we work back face to face. So when I respond to this question, I've got a couple of different, lots of different things to share. And you don't have to take all of these on board, of course, but just what will work for you. When it comes to your question around what would I do to re-engineer, pretty much translate my workshop to a keynote speech, if I was looking at 2013 Leanne, what I would have done was I would have got the workshop plan, I would have opened my slides if I had them, and I probably would have just sat at the computer, resequenced them and added a few different things in. And it would have been an agonizing process. I don't think I would have enjoyed it much. I would have pretty much gone into it with a mindset of, I'm excited about this opportunity, but now I've got to get my existing ideas and how do I translate that? And just sitting in front of the computer would have made it very painful for me. 2021 Leanne, I think about this completely differently. It's the same philosophy, I guess, that Yuri and I talk about a lot. When we talk about that translating our face-to-face workshops to virtual, it's a translation process. But what I like to really think about in terms of my mindset is reimagining what it looks like. So the example with virtual is you don't just take your face-to-face meeting and stick a webcam on it. You've got to think about it completely differently because it's a different medium. So what I'd suggest is the same thing in reimagining it. Don't take your existing workshop and delete the interactive parts to make it a keynote. Let's really reimagine what this could look like for you. And let's get excited about it. And it doesn't mean that you have to sit in front of a computer to draft it. So before I even start planning my speech or what I'm going to talk about, I ask some pretty important questions but go back to the brief. And some things I would consider would be talking to the client and saying, hey, why me? Why did you seek me out to deliver this? So finding out that response. What are you after as a result of your conference? So what do you want to drive with your conference? And also, what are you after from the speech that you've chosen me to talk about? Of course, audience as well. We all know this as facilitators. This is Facilitation 101. Who will be in the audience? What are their pain points and challenges? How are they thinking and feeling? How do we want them to think and feel differently as a result of having us spoken? And timing, I think, is also really relevant and probably overlooked. When will you be speaking? What time of day? How long do you have? Who is before you on the agenda? Who's after? So get the agenda if you can, see what the run sheet is. For example, if you were talking after Tony Robbins, you don't need to be the person that's like bringing all the energy, because he would have really warmed them up for you. They're probably exhausted actually. So thinking of the contrast between you and your previous speaker. Also, timing is really important here. The time of day. Are you first up on day one? That's an awesome spot to have. You can really set the tone of the conference. Or are you right at the end or midway through? Like, what part of the event are you on? And just mapping how you think the energy will work across that conference. Also, the timing in the month or the day. So one example when I was emceeing, it's an MC example, but you could use it for a keynote, it was the same week that Harry and Meghan were getting married. And so I sort of joked that, oh, look, Elton John couldn't make it because he's at the wedding, and just brought in stuff like, so current trends, topics, look what's trending on Twitter, see what's happened on that day. Just work around that. For a Toastmasters speech I did, it was on Paddy's Day, so I incorporated some Irish stories. I've shared this before on the podcast, but just seeing and bringing in those themes can really make it more relevant and more timely for your audience. Okay, so the format for a keynote, we all know what the difference is. I think it's like a workshop is more interactive, get group discussion. A keynote really is there to inspire. What that means is you don't need to go into the detail of how to actually do things. People do want practical details though. It's a fine line to balance, but really it's all about creating that inspiration and motivation, getting someone to take action. And ramping up the why. What this means is when you consider your workshop content and what the client really wants from this, what the conference theme is, you may not need to dive into all the content that you'd cover in a workshop. In fact, you might just do a deep dive on one concept. So it's really good to have those clarifying questions in the back of your mind. I do like having a Facila speaker type of approach. I've made that up. Facila speaker obviously combines facilitation and speaking. So how can you embed some interactive moments? And I'll share a bit of that. That's not so traditional. I like it though. And I've really started doing a lot more of that when it comes to virtual keynotes, just making them super interactive, particularly because they're online. But why can't you bring this into a real life event? Because people are there to connect with other people. That it remains the same. We go to these conferences, but we want to meet other people. So yes, channel your inner Facila speaker. Okay. Right. Once I've got the answers to those questions, I won't begin to look at my workshop content. The client has come to you because you are the expert in this topic, in this field. You've already got the information that you need, particularly if you've run workshops, because you've had conversations and dialogue around it. You understand what people resonate with. In fact, a workshop's just a really great way of testing the audience and seeing what they resonate with most, or what the objections are and what questions they have. So if you are delivering this workshop prior to your keynote, see what questions are popping up, and then can you answer those or raise them as objections within your keynote speech? Now, because you are the expert, you will not need to hop onto Google. You do not need to read another book about this. That's a trap I think many of us fall into. 2013, Leanne, 2017, 2019, Leanne has fallen into this trap of, I need more information to really back up what I'm trying to say. And look, you can get some case studies and things later on, but initially, let's just do a brain dump. So don't hop into Google. Don't think you need more. Get away from that trap. Get some Post-it notes. Move to another room in your house, not where the computer is. Don't take your laptop with you, and just brain dump everything. Everything you know about the topic. One topic per Post-it note. Any questions, objections that came up in your workshop, again, just throw them down and give yourself about 10 minutes for this activity. Wait another 10 minutes, come back to it, set a timer for 5 minutes, and then add more. So you should have at least, I'd say, 20 or 30 concepts written on these Post-it notes. That's exciting. That means that you're getting into that flow. Then what I'd suggest is, again, step away from the PC and go for a walk. Take a notepad and pen. I did this the other day and then it started raining. Didn't work so well, but if it's a beautiful day, step outside. It'd be great for your inspiration and, of course, your blue sky thinking. Now, with this notepad and pen, what you want to do is all of the answers to the questions you got from your client about the pain points, who's in the audience, and all of the content that you brainstormed, you want to just start mapping where your content can help solve that problem. So you might use your own favorite mind map tool, but just jot it down, make notes. You're not showing this to anyone. This is your internal reference point. But what it does is it starts really connecting who your audience is, what the client wants, how you want them to think and feel with the content that you've already created from your workshop. You're just connecting it together. Anything that doesn't really have a connection, I would probably look at then discarding or thinking about how could this possibly connect? Do I really need it? So it's kind of like a culling exercise as well. But really what a keynote speech is, you have a case to make and you want to gather your evidence to support that case and do it in an entertaining way. So the best thing about running a workshop before you're moving into a keynote is the fact that, like I said, you've got the objections there. So that can be used to then create the problem solution mode. Well, what do I think this? And then you create your solution and share that within your speech. After you've gone for your walk and you've connected things, come back, look at your post-it notes again, and now just start rearranging them in an order to build that case. Depending on how much time you have, most keynotes I'd say between 20 to 40 minutes. I'd look at, if you can, at chunking them into 3 different areas. So case 1, case 2, case 3, that all support your overarching objective or the message that you want to share. Now, before I talked about the facilitator speaker approach, but I actually start with getting all the content, consolidating the content, and then I'll go over it again and work out where are my interactive elements. Okay, so what we have so far is we've got answers to the questions that the client gave us around timing and everything else. We've sort of figured out what we need to bring. So if we're after lunch, we need more energy to kick off with. We've got a case that we really want to defend. We've got 3 overarching topics that can help get us there. Now, of course, this is an express episode. I could dive into each one of those elements of what I spoke about into its own podcast episode, but I'm here to sort of help Adele just with a framework for getting this done. Okay, so once I've got those, then I'll look at my sequencing. I love starting speeches with a story. And often I'll use a random story that just doesn't, from the surface, like how could it connect with my content? And I love that challenge of connecting it. So I did a speech at Disrupt HR, which I'll link to in the show notes for this one. My speech was about stand-up desks. I'm actually recording this episode. I'm standing up. But my opening story for this speech, it was only a 5-minute speech. My opening story was about how I was watching a rugby game between Australia and Scotland and Australia had lost. I mean, does that, from the surface, that does not seem like it could connect with stand-up desks, right? But that was the joy of it, the unpredictability that I talk about a lot. It was an unpredictable story. So people at this HR conference going, why is she talking about rugby and eating KFC? And they're curious. I've also told another story about how we used to have these chickens and they stopped laying eggs and how that related to me wanting to work outside of normal office hours. Again, what is the connection there? I think there's a link to that story somewhere on YouTube. So if I can find it, I'll pop it in the show notes. But it's all about that randomness and unpredictability. And also looking at just things that happen in your day-to-day life that could possibly relate to the content, because then you connect really well with people. Because it's not about that time that you were, as Matthew Dix talks about, like a near-death experience. You want to create a connection early, and a way to do that is to get people saying, oh yeah, that I can see that happening in my own life. And that's why homework for life is such an important and awesome thing to do. If you haven't listened to that episode with Matthew Dix, I'll pop a link to it in the show notes. What he talks about is just at the end of every day, just think of one thing that happened that day. And it doesn't need to be spectacular. In fact, the more mundane it is, the better. You collect a series of those stories that happen every day, you find that you can absolutely relate them to anything in life. So homework for life is something I'd recommend if you're going down the path of keynote speaking, but even as an awesome workshop skill. All right, so you've got your draft here. Now, at some stage, you're actually going to have to start writing this speech. One good thing to think about is just to write it for the rubbish bin. It won't be perfect. The hardest thing about writer's block is that we think it has to be perfect and then nothing gets written down. So just write it as if you're going to throw it away. I also like putting time limits on things. So maybe a 12-minute timer, just throw it on and just get stuck into just tapping anything that you think about. But even it doesn't have to be remotely connected, just get it down and written so you got something to work with. It's sometimes easier if you write headlines down and then bullet points underneath it to give you, again, to work with that structure that you've already got. So far you've got a template you can work within, and you're just filling in the blanks to really ramp up a problem and then give a solution. Now, it's also helpful to bring in a variety of mediums to demonstrate your point. This is the contrast that I talk about a lot. So for some points, can you bring in stats? Can you bring in data? Is there a story? Is there an example? Is there a video or something that you can really bring in that might ramp up that problem or solution even more? I also like having the headlines because I often find, and maybe I'm just a verbal processor, it's why I'm a podcaster, but when I'm a guest on other people's podcasts and they ask me a question and I respond, I just like, wow, I never would have said that before. Thank you for asking the question. I make sure I get that transcribed. So if you could have, if you're struggling to write, if you change your subtopic headings into questions, and then again, maybe go for a walk, get someone to ask you the question and just verbalize the response and record it. There's apps, Otto.ai is a great app that you can use on your phone, and you can just verbal diarrhea, get it out, then come back, get it transcribed, see what you have, see if there's any gold in there, and then use that as well. But it depends on the best way that you work. I find it much easier to verbalize and talk it through rather than sitting looking at a blank cursor. Also grab paper if that works better for you. Try a different environment, but there's no escaping the stage. You've got to get something down there and flesh out your ideas more. Now, once you have that draft, that's when you should start doing or do your first paper reading. And I got this idea from Michael Port from his podcast and book, Steal the Show. Because what you write down, it may sound amazing or it may look amazing when you read it, but when you actually say it, it doesn't roll off your tongue and it doesn't really resonate with something that you'd say in real life. If you were just chatting to a friend, it just sounds like, might sound really professional or over-engineered, over-academic. I find that I can be sometimes very academic when I write. So it's got to fit your language and be comfortable for you to say. So you want it to come off the tongue and sound authentic to you. As you do that, then start editing what you've written down just to make sure that it flows better for you. And as you're doing this, as you're reading it out loud and going through it, then you can bring in a bit of stagecraft. It's called blocking. And this is where you go through what you're writing down and you might think, I really want to emphasize this line here. It's so important. And you might add a pause there. So you write above that, pause. So again, I'd suggest either printing this draft print off or I've got an iPad so I can add annotations over the top. But you start blocking it and you think about, where should I be on stage as I say this? And you can use the stage to really create contrast in the way that you deliver it. For example, every time you share a story, you might start walking to stage right. Anytime you want to land a point, you walk back to the middle of a stage, you pause and you deliver a point. Anytime you want to add a bit of interaction and throw to the audience, you might move to stage left. It's really important to become intentional. And as you practice your speech, it's not only about practicing and rehearsing the content, it's practicing those movements as well. And this is where, and Mark Bowden would be the absolute go-to guy, authority on this. Any of his tips for body language and how to use your arms to display authority would be very helpful. Like I said, though, I know that I'm throwing a lot of content at you, Adele, and for anyone else listening, I'm sure it might seem overwhelming. I just want to let you know that any of these tips, you don't have to apply them all one by one. You might just say, okay, well, the way that you've designed that speech, Leanne, I'm going to take that, I'm going to use that. Or yeah, okay, instead of opening PowerPoint, I'm going to go for a walk instead and just brain dump everything that I've got. So you've got, all of us, we've got a lot of time to implement and just try one thing at a time. And I'm just sharing the entire sort of end-to-end process of something that I'd go through if asked to do the same thing. The other thing that you can block when you've got your draft speech is your voice. So this is very powerful, as we know. When will you inflect? When are you going to speed up? When will you slow down to really emphasize a point? Julian Treasure, he's been on this podcast a couple of times. His speech, How to Speak So That People Want to Listen, is one of my favorites on voice. It's a great starter if you're looking to block your speech and get ideas on how to manipulate your voice to make your message more effective. Okay, so what have we done so far? We've done an awful lot. We have brain dumped, we've connected what the client wants and what our audience wants with that content. We've drafted it out. We've got 3 subtopics. We're really building a case. We've got problem solution. We're using a variety of mediums to share that, stories and data. Now let's look at supporting materials, supporting mediums that can really supercharge your speech. We often, and notice that, okay, we're 21 minutes into this podcast and this is the first time I'm talking about PowerPoint. Whereas I think, like I said, 2013, Leanne, that would have been the first thing I would have jumped to. So PowerPoint is a supporting medium. You don't want PowerPoint to, look, it's tempting because you think, I've got a 40-minute speech. How am I going to remember all of this? I'll just put my keynotes on a PowerPoint so that can guide me. If you need that level of comfort, what I'd suggest is, could you just use images with 1 or 2 words to be that guide for you rather than bullet points? That's okay. I think in front of 750 people, it would be nice to have some type of multimedia happening. I'm sure that you can engage without it, Adele, but it is kind of nice to have that point. Like I said, one awesome image. So there's websites like pexels.com. You can get people off fiverr.com to design you something that looks really quite professional and that reflects your brand. You can also think about the interplay between your speech and the slides and use that for humor. So again, back to this Disrupt HR speech. I was giving an example of how we feel when we're using a stand-up desks and we've got 2 Excel spreadsheets open on 2 different screens. And I said, when you're standing up, it makes you feel like this. And I clicked the timer over and it showed this like epic this DJ in Europe and the crowd was going nuts. And so that added a bit of comedy to it because I was using the contrast of being on Excel, like being a DJ, but that's how it felt. And so what I did was I used that image to create the humor with the timing. So that's something I'd also consider as you're working through, is there a point here where the punchline could be the image on PowerPoint to perhaps make it even more memorable? So what I'd suggest is when looking at PowerPoint is use it to add, enhance, or provide contrast. And if it doesn't do any of that, then maybe you don't need to use it. In fact, the contrast could be that you share a story, you have an image on the screen. Then when you talk about the lesson learnt from that, you go to a blank screen and it's just you talking to it. That also creates contrast as well. Okay. So we've got the medium. Now let's look at where can we pop in some interactive moments. How do we make this more Facilla speaker-like? Your go-to is always going to be a question. The second someone asks a question, our brain responds to scramble for a solution. But how do you get that interaction within a crowd of 750 people? And plus, I'm sure there's COVID restrictions perhaps as well. So there might be people sitting in every second seat. So they're not directly next to each other. So something that I use in virtual workshops, which I think would also apply here, would be just really encourage that internal reflection, but get them to write something down so it feels like they're physically involved with your presentation. They're moving, right? When they write things down. I just do sneaky things like I'll get a piece of paper and say, fold it in half. And so everyone's doing that and it feels like they're participating. So get them to fold it in a certain way. Again, think of those frictionless questions that you can ask if you are getting them to turn to the person next to them to answer a question. Guessing games are kind of fun. You might have a percentage and say, look, what percentage of people are burnt out at work overall this study? Get them to think about it, talk to the person next to them, and then you share the response. So before you give them the answer, you ask them a question. That makes it very easy. If you look down your script, what you've drafted, where are the moments where there's something that you think, oh, they might know the answer to this, or it could create a great discussion. I'll hold off on giving them the answer straight away. I'll ask the question first, and then I'll give them the answer. And of course, interactive tools like Slido. Like I said on last week's show, I'm partnering with them on their 2021 Trends Report. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Slido is an amazing tool that you can use. Everyone's on their phones. They can vote in. It's extremely interactive as well. You've got your speech, you've got your interaction, you've got your awesome medium. What's left to do? Well, practice. Practice your blocking, practice any hard phrases or reword them in case. Again, this is where I will get outside, go for a walk, record yourself speaking it. And instead of listening to podcasts like mine, just listen to yourself speaking it. It's a great way to memorize a speech and to think about, oh, I think there should be a pause there, or I should do this instead. When you hear it back, it's just a different experience. When you do rehearse it as well, don't rehearse it from the beginning of the talk all the time, because we always seem to nail the first 5 minutes. And I think that's good for our own comfort levels. But if there's an interruption or something might go off track, if you can just pick it up at any point and go, right, I'm going to start at the halfway point. I'm going to start 5 minutes before I end it. And get more familiar with those parts and and isolate them and think, is this the best way that I can do it? I think that's a pretty ninja strategy that not many people talk about, is like, can you pick it up at any point and just go? Also rehearse when you're wearing the clothes and shoes that you'll be wearing when you deliver it. And also keep in mind that giving a keynote, sometimes they give you a lapel microphone and you've got to tuck that into something. So wearing a dress can sometimes be impractical. So just think about that, as well as the shoes that you're wearing. Make sure they're comfortable. Oh, I missed one point about the interactivity. Just one thing I thought I'd share. What you can do as well is if you're talking about a particular topic, let's just say it's about communication or something pretty broad, a question you can throw to your audience members is, hey, I want you to open your phone right now. I want you to find an image that reminds you of good communication, poor communication, wellness, whatever it is. And then I want you to share that with the person next to you. I think that's kind of cool as well, bringing in the phone to do that. Just thought I'd add that in before I got to the end of the episode. But of course, we've got to talk about showtime, right? The day when you're actually delivering. And we've got so many tips from previous guests on how they prepare. I think the critical thing is just make sure that you're ready so you get a great night's sleep the night before. There's nothing worse than waking up and thinking, oh, I should have done this. If you've practiced it so much, you're fine. You can rest easy. And I found just a great way to get those nerves out is to get in nice and early to the event that you're at, talk to people that will be there, just learn more about them. And then it's just nice having a familiar face or two in the crowd rather than just getting on cold. So mingle. And of course, it's something that's a lot easier said than done is enjoy the experience. And when you're on stage, just take a moment to breathe it in and just think, wow, I've got 750 people here and they're listening to me. That's amazing. So Adele, I hope this has really helped you. Any listener that is converting or reimagining a workshop to a keynote speech, I hope this helps you too. We had a lot of comments coming from Flipchart, which I'll share with you right now. They were awesome. So Mel Kettle said, I do a lot of speaking and tend to use facilitation techniques during keynotes. So she's a facilitator speaker, such as asking questions, sometimes asking people to talk to the person next to them. I find the best speakers either don't use slides or use them sparingly with an image and 1 to 5 words in large font. Use props, walk around the whole stage, make it about the audience and not about you. Thanks, Mel. Truett Black says, I find it extremely helpful to recruit friends who also do keynotes to help me with a content review and later a dry run. I won't deliver the entire keynote because that is too time consuming for them. Last one, prepping so thoroughly allows me to reach a flow state where I am aware of audience needs and totally enjoying the experience. There is a zone that exists between too nervous and too relaxed that will allow you to be at your most scintillating, engaging self. Best wishes, I'm sure you'll kill it. Nicholas King says, the hardest bit has already been done. You said yes. Without a doubt, use stories. So important. Stories help people relate to the topic and speech. One piece of advice I received which helped me was, if there was a TV reporter crew outside the auditorium door asking people who attended your speech, how did the speech help you? Then what would you want those people to answer? My belief is a speech is about inspiring change. So what is a change you want to inspire? This helps structure the speech in such a way that the audience receives something from it. All the best. Ensure above all else to enjoy yourself. Rashid Abu Hamda says, great tips in the thread. Go Flippers. On a side, Rashid, I totally agree. How awesome is this feedback? It's great. Okay, Rashid adds, I'll add use the rule of threes to structure your keynote. Entree, main, and dessert, or the what, the why, and the how. Think about what are the three main things you want to land for the audience. Just amazing tips there. I hope you found this episode helpful. Let us know how you go with your keynote. And if you've got any other tips to add them in the conversation thread on the Flipchart. We'd love to hear from them. All the best, and I'll chat to you next week. Thank you so much for tuning in to the First Time Facilitator podcast and making it to the end of an episode. Hey, the best way to a podcaster's heart is through an iTunes review. So please hop onto Apple Podcasts, write a review for the show, pop your Twitter handle in there, and I'll say thanks to you on the show. Also, hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you're not on my email list, check it out. Head on to leannehughes.com/subscribe to get all the behind the scenes news on the show, what I'm up to, and of course, facilitation tips.